Hi everyone and welcome to New Zealand. Today I'm going to take you through the streets of Lyttelton. With today's population of just over 3,000 inhabitants, the town hasn't seen an expansion as big as its port. This is mainly due to its geography, with those massive slopes all around it acting as natural boundaries. However, the rather small town hosts the second biggest port of New Zealand. I am going to rewind time a little bit and go back to when it all started. The discovery by James Cook, the first settlers, the history of its port and of its tunnel. I will also show how it is to live in a town today. So let's go back to the year 1770. Maori people have lived in and around the area from about 1350. They first sighted Europeans on the 16th of February of 1770, while James Cook was on his first voyage to New Zealand. It was probably not until the year 1815, when sailors from the sailing ship Governor Bliff landed, that Maori saw the first Europeans set foot on Banks Peninsula. In 1827, Captain William Wiseman named the harbour Port Cooper. Aiming to establish a Church of England colony in New Zealand, early survey work in Lyttelton was done by Captain Thomas and Charles Torles. Their orders were to select and survey a site, prepare for the arrival of the first settlers, and to make a map of the land from which settlers would be able to choose their own sites. Thomas and Charles arrived back in New Zealand in November 1848 and began exploring their preferred site at the head of the then Port Cooper. Thomas and his team began work on barracks for the new settlers to stay in, storehouses, a jetty and customs house, as well as a road over the port hills. However, money had run out by the time and an alternative track over the hills along the bridle path to the Heathcote Valley was used instead. At that time, building work almost stopped completely because of money issues. A lot of the work had still not been completed when the first 4 ships of immigrants arrived in December 1850. Captain Thomas received a lot of criticism for the state of the town site and other preparations. Him and his entire team was dismissed in 1851. So most of the work before completion was then done by Edward Jolly. In his diary, Jolly explains how the streets got their names.
As soon as I completed the map, I took it to Thomas, who, putting on his gold spectacles and opening his book, would read out a bishop's name to hear if it sounded well. If I agreed with him that it did, I put the name to one of the streets requiring baptism.
Norwich Quay, Canterbury, Ripon, Exeter, London, Winchester and Oxford streets. The celebrated track, the bridle path, which crosses the hills behind the town, was made for the Canterbury pilgrims to reach their future homes on the White Plains on the other side of the hill. The 30th of August 1849, an official proclamation establishes Lyttelton as a recognized port. The first harbour engineering begins, a construction of a 46 meters long by 4.5 meters wide jetty. The 16th of December 1850, 4 ships named Randolph, Cressy, Sir George Seymour and Charlotte Jane arrived in Lyttelton Harbour carrying the first of what was to be known as the Canterbury Pilgrims. There was only about a dozen houses in Lyttelton, so most of the settlers had to trek over the hills via the bridle path to their allotments in Christchurch. They had to carry light and essential household goods with them over the rough and steep route. In her book, Jane Deans, who arrived in 1853, remembers the view from her walk on the bridle path.
It was all one vast open plain, without a road or fence or house or garden or trees. The plains were covered with tussock grass and fern on high ground, and flax and raupo in wet and boggy places.
The first ship, the Charlotte Jane, arrives at 10 a.m., bringing the main body of immigrants. It is followed by the Randolph at 5:30 p.m., the Sir George Seymour at noon the next day, and the Cressy 11 days later. In less than 2 weeks, the population of Lyttelton swelled to 1100. Over the next 3 years, a total of 3,549 settlers arrived in Lyttelton. Most of them went to settle in Christchurch using the bridle path. On the 24th of October 1870, a fire broke out in the Queen's Hotel on London Street and had soon engulfed the main centre of Lyttelton. Prisoners of the Lyttelton gaol were let out from the cells to help combat the flames. 2/3 of Lyttelton had been destroyed, with 30 businesses in all having perished in the fire, along with many private homes. The rebuild took place and the town saw its first architectural change. Lyttelton is renowned for its port and its tunnel. It has long been the main port of the Christchurch area, having been opened in 1877. The town was being settled at a time when there was a boom in railway construction all over England. A rail tunnel between Lyttelton and Christchurch was a way to get bulky luggage and goods from the port to the nearby city. But Christchurch did not even have a railway, and a tunnel would be extremely expensive because of the need to drill through volcanic rock. However, with the growth in wool exports in the 1850s and the increased money this gave the city, the provincial council decided to go ahead with the rail tunnel. It was time to connect Lyttelton to the growing city of Christchurch. Work began in 1860. Dobson was the engineer who looked after the building of the tunnel, and his skills was shown when the two lines of the tunnel, one coming from Lyttelton, one from Heathcote, met exactly as planned on the 24th of May 1867. 5 days later, it was possible for men to walk from one end of the tunnel to the other. There had been a number of problems in building the tunnel. There was more hard rock to be drilled through than expected, and ways to ventilate and drain the tunnel had to be found. There were few injuries during the building, but 2 men died when explosives were not handled carefully enough. The Lyttelton Rail Tunnel was officially opened for passenger traffic on the 9th of December 1867, taking less than 7 minutes to make the trip. It was New Zealand's first rail tunnel, and for many years the longest. It was the first in the world to be driven through the side of an extinct volcano. The tunnel was 2.4 kilometers long and built at the cost of 195,000 British pounds. It equates to over 11 million British pounds in today's money, or 15 million US dollars. A couple decades later, when a road tunnel was proposed, it was rejected because horses arriving hot from the Canterbury plains could catch a cold on entering the cooler temperatures of the tunnel. Instead, a road was created to the east of the town of Evans Pass, from the village of Sumner. But there were disadvantages to having a single-track railway tunnel, and at the same time a winding drive over the hills as the main ways to and from the port. It was too long and too complicated to transport the loads. Legislation was passed in 1956 to allow the tunnel to be built, and the road tunnel finally opens in February 1964. Between 1958 and 1967, the port saw such prosperity that other ports located on the coast north of Christchurch briefly reopened their closed facilities for a decade. This allowed smaller ships to bypass the congested Lyttelton wharves. In the 1970s, the port was chosen as one of the main ports in the South Island to be dredged and upgraded, with the container facility opening in 1977. Substantial quantities of South Island coal have been shipped from this port for the past 100 years. The port facilities have provided for liquid gas and petrol for over the past 50 years. In essence, the port could be viewed as the primary port for energy shipments in the South Island. It has consistently grown over the years until the 4th of September 2010. At 4:35 am, a 7.1 earthquake shakes the Canterbury region. It damaged over 75% of the port's wharves, but not only. The 2010 Canterbury earthquake also damaged some of Lyttelton's historic buildings. There was damage to the town's infrastructure as well, but the port's facilities and tunnel quickly returned to operation. Luckily, the overall quake damage was less significant than in Christchurch itself, due to the dampening effects of the solid rock that the town rests on, and its moderate distance from the epicenter. Unfortunately, on the 22nd of February 2011, a magnitude 6.3 aftershock caused much more widespread damage in Lyttelton than its predecessor, due to its close proximity to Lyttelton and a shallow depth of 5 kilometers. This time, there was extensive damage to residential and commercial property, leading to the demolition of a number of high-profile heritage buildings. Many other buildings were severely damaged. Much of Lyttelton's architectural heritage was lost as a result. Damage was deemed too expensive for construction. By June 2011, 6 buildings in London Street had been demolished, along with another 4 on Norwich Quay. In June 2014, a 30-year vision for the recovery and enhancement of the port is released, and the next month, the growth of the port restarts with $12 million worth of ship-to-shore gantry cranes. New shores are being constructed soon after, with the latest opening in 2020. The port has seen its biggest expansion ever during the last 10 years. So, how's life in today's Lyttelton? After 250 years, its architecture has changed a lot. Fire after fire, earthquake after earthquake. The port had a big changeover, and its surface is now almost as big as the town. Other than that, with a limited space for inland expansion, it's pretty much looking the same. I don't think someone living here 100 years ago would be lost walking the streets of today's Lyttelton. Even though its accessibility has largely improved over time, the town still feels like a world apart. Coming from the big city of Christchurch, driving through the road tunnel feels like entering a time machine. The fast voyage ends up in a beautiful place with great panoramic views. It has something special. Between eating, drinking, and exploring quirky shops, there are several walking and cycle trails which wind through the hills behind the town. The bridle path still exists and is used daily by hundreds of people, either having a run or a morning walk. Knowing all the history behind it, it feels quite special to walk there. There are several monuments built over time that still stand today, and memorial plates remembering the people who passed over the hills towards Christchurch. The port is as lively as the town. When it's busy, all the machineries moving containers and winding through the wharves are as noisy as the many packed restaurants and bars during the weekend. On a Sunday morning, its farmers' market is a must-do, as it is known as the best in the region. And if you find it too busy or too noisy, you can take the ferry to the picturesque Diamond Harbour, right across Lyttelton Harbour. Lyttelton is the best of both worlds. It has the accessibility of a big suburb with the charm and feel of a small town. Throw in loads of lovely houses, gardens, native birds, a great sense of community, and you have the perfect little haven of a town.